Iconography cannot be isolated from the rest of liturgical tradition and studied in terms of simple aesthetics. It must remain in the context of liturgy, theology, spirituality, hymnography, and architecture. All these facets of orthodoxy augment and supplement each other. What the hymn says in words and music, the icon says in pictures. The criteria used in evaluating liturgical art cannot be simply personal taste, or pure aesthetics, does it look nice, or even authenticity, but rather, how well does it convey the truth, reveal truth, unchangeable and eternal, that in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity was united to human nature, thus making salvation possible by breaking down the wall of separation between God and man, and opened to us the doors of paradise. As St. Athanasius put it, God became man so that man could become God. The icon is a devotional object and an integral part of Orthodox liturgy, and expresses orthodoxy in its totality. What is an icon? Icon is a Greek word meaning image. This word usually invokes a negative response in light of the second commandment's prohibition of idolatry. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth below. And again, all worshippers of images are put to shame who make their boast in worthless idols. Many more examples could also be produced. But it was not against his people's making images that God directed this command, but against idolatry, to which they were prone. God did command the making of various other images, for instance, the images of cherubim to be placed around the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon also included images in pure gold of cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, bulls, lions in his temple. The faithful did not confuse them with God. These images were not idols. The reason the Old Testament prohibited images of God was that no man had ever seen God. The Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. This from Deuteronomy. And from Exodus, no man looks on the face of God and lives. Moses only saw his back while hiding under the cleft in the rock. But with the Incarnation, everything is changed. There occurred a decisive and eternal change in the relationship between God and man, between God and all material creation. The Word became flesh. God robed himself in the garment of humanity. The Old Testament prohibitions against images is now revoked, as St. John of Damascus explains in his first oration. God, who has neither body nor form, was never represented in days of old. But now that he has come in the flesh and has lived among men, I can represent the visible appearance of God. So we now represent the appearance of God on earth. The apostles were privileged in that they were able to see Christ with their own eyes. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Lord calls his own disciples blessed. Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous men long to see what you see, and do not see it, and to hear what you hear, and do not hear it. We also long to hear and to see what is possible for us. We still are able to hear the Lord's words from listening to Scriptures. And we are able to see his image by gazing at his icon. There are those today who would echo the argument of the 8th century iconoclasts that it is impossible to depict Christ, since either we represent his divine nature, the incarnate Word of God, or we portray his human nature, the man Jesus, distinct from his divinity. But the Council of Chalcedon makes a very clear distinction between nature or essence on the one hand and person or hypostases on the other. When we represent our Lord, we do not represent his divinity or his humanity, but his person, which inconceivably unites in itself these two natures, without confusion and without division, as the Chalcedonian dogma defines it. Those outside the Church who observe Orthodox faithful venerating icons would still feel they have claims against us on the grounds of idolatry. We must clarify a few terms. The Greek fathers understood the distinction between proskonesis, venerating, bowing down, and latria, absolute worship, adoration. Veneration is due to kings, ancestors, elders, and fellow men. There are many scriptural examples of veneration. Abraham venerated the sons of Hamor. Jacob venerated his brother Esau, and also bowed down before the tip of Joseph's staff. Joshua and Daniel venerated the angel of God. Worship, adoration, is due to God alone. We worship God. We venerate icons. An icon, however, is not simply a holy picture. It does not portray a physical reality, a photographic image, or worse, saccharine sentimentality. It rather portrays a spiritual reality, the transfigured image and likeness of the one portrayed, the deified image of the one who has returned to the original state of man's creation before the fall, before the distortion of the image of God in which man was created. But it even goes one step further. The icon depicts man deified, become one with God. In this respect, the icon may appear unnatural. The nose is too long, the eyes are too large, and so on. But if it appears unnatural to us, we are reminded that in God the order of nature is overthrown. The bush burned but was not consumed. Israel passed through the Red Sea, but the sea remained impassable. The virgin gave birth, but remained a virgin. These are all types of biblical figures in scriptural reading, as opposed to literal or figurative interpretations. Adam and Jonah, for example, are types of Christ. Another device to illustrate this unnaturalness is the hand in giving a blessing. Rather than casting a shadow on the area behind it, actually emits the uncreated light, as was shown on Mount Tabor during the Transfiguration, and lightens the area behind it. The icon, then, is a window into heaven, allowing us to see the deified state. What is natural here may not be natural there. Architectural representations are not always accurate, for instance. Windows and doors and walls are not always in their proper places, and pillars may land in open areas, appearing to be suspended in space. Architectural scenes indicate that an event has taken place indoors. Icons are never shown from inside. Another technique which is used to testify to the reversal of nature is inverse perspective. In normal perspective, the eye is drawn to a vanishing point created by a convergence of lines, which tends to give a third dimension to an otherwise two-dimensional surface. In Figure 1, our eye is forced to travel down the road to the point where it disappears on the horizon, a point within the frame of the picture. In Figure 2, our eyes may follow the lines as they converge at either point A or point B, again, both of which are within the frame of the picture. This is called two-point perspective. In an icon, the vanishing point is within the spectator himself in front of the panel. The viewer is opening a narrow visual door which broadens out to an infinite fullness. The gate is narrow that leads to life, we are told in the Gospel of Matthew. St. Macarius the Great elaborates on the image of the narrow door in speaking of spiritual progress. Doors are opened, and man enters the interior of many abodes. And as he enters, still other doors are opened before him, and he is enriched. And to the degree that he is enriched, new marvels are shown to him. Once embarked on the path to which the narrow gate leads, man sees endless possibilities and perspectives opening before him, and his path, far from becoming narrow, becomes wider. On a more technical sense, inverse perspective holds the viewer's eyes up front, keeping them from traveling back. This icon of the hospitality of Abraham, commonly referred to as the Old Testament Trinity, by the great Russian master Andrei Rublev, gives an excellent example of the order of nature being overthrown. The footstools and thrones of the end angels are shown in inverse perspective, while the opening in the center of the table is done in normal perspective. The building, tree, and cliff in the background combine to give this icon a rhomboid form, Rublev's favorite compositional device. An icon, then, has a sense of otherworldliness, unnatural, not of this world. We know that in 7 out of 11 post-resurrectional appearances, Christ was not immediately recognized. Mary mistook him for the gardener. The two men on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread, which of course is interpreted in a Eucharistic sense. He appeared through closed doors, but was not a ghost. He ate, was felt, was probed. He remained flesh and blood, but deified flesh and blood. There is some logic to an icon, however. The face, for instance, is proportional, based upon moduli, measured in nose lengths. The entire body is based on face lengths, each of which is equal to 3 nose lengths. An icon also conforms to its prototype, and cannot reflect only the imagination of the painter. Original icons were painted often by those who actually saw the one being depicted. There is a tradition that one of the first icons was made by Christ himself. According to the history of Evagrius, a king from Edessa, Abgar, a leper, had heard of the healing power of Christ and sent his ambassador Ananias to him asking for his prayers. Because of the crowd, Ananias was not able to get close to the Lord and had to content himself with sketching him from a distance. Christ, realizing the poor man's predicament, took a linen rag and pressed it to his face and gave it to Ananias, promising to send one of his disciples to Edessa after his ascension. Disappointed, Ananias returned home and presented the linen to the king. The impression of Christ's face was clearly visible, and the king was cured from his leprosy. This shroud is referred to as the image made without hands. A Western version, often referred to as the Veronica's veil, and having been adopted as the fourth station of the Way of the Cross, has a maiden wiping the brow of Christ as he climbs towards Golgotha, and the impression of his face remains imprinted on her veil. Historically, though, we know of no Veronica. The term comes from two words, vera, true, icona, image. Vera, icona, Veronica. St. Luke is ascribed with painting the first icon of the Virgin Mary. This achievement was accomplished while Mary was yet living, and Our Lady was said to have stated, "My grace and power are with this image," obviously enduring to serve future generations of Orthodox faithful. One type of icon of the Theotokos painted by St. Luke is referred to as Hodogitria, which means she who leads the way. Both the Virgin and Child are turned full face toward the spectator, and her hand, pointing to the Christ Child, emphasizes his divinity. Another image is the type Eumelenia, Our Lady of Tenderness, which represents the mutual caress of mother and child, and is the image of a mother who suffers deeply for the inevitable suffering which awaits her child. Traditions early established important characteristics of saints depicted on icons. We can trace portrayals of St. Peter, for instance, back to a 4th century glass from the catacombs, and even earlier to a Roman medallion of the 2nd century. In each case, his distinguishing features remain virtually unchanged: curly hair, a forelock, and a rounded white beard. Colors, poses, and inscriptions are usually dictated by tradition to conform to the original, although it is still possible to detect eras, periods, places, styles, and even individual hands, although iconographers never sign their work. Bishops are shown in vestments of their office. Martyrs are shown in red robes and may carry a cross. The means of their martyrdom are not depicted. We care not about their particular means of suffering, but their victorious deification. A white veil denotes chastity. Prophets will usually carry a scroll. Warrior saints will often be shown in armor. As a postscript, St. George rides a white horse. St. Demetrius rides a black one, although often other unnatural colors will be used. Kings, queens, and princes are shown wearing crowns. The Church stipulates that icons be painted as they were painted by the ancient and holy iconographers. Imitation is not a bad thing, but is to be desired. "Be imitators of me, as I am of Christ," wrote St. Paul. Icon painting is one of the traditions of the Church, as are 3 immersions and baptism, praying facing the east, awaiting the dawn of the 8th day, the day of recreation, the manner of receiving the Eucharist, and so on. St. Paul tells us in 2 Thessalonians, "So then, brethren, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by letter." And again, in 1 Corinthians, "I commend you because you remember me in everything, and maintain the traditions, even as I have delivered them to you." Once a painter leaves the tradition, goes off on his own, all kinds of problems arise. If it is possible to distort truth in words, how much easier is it to distort truth through images? The danger of accepting Western art into the Orthodox Church is that it does not represent deification. The West understands sanctified man as a vessel which contains created grace, much like a glass which contains water. The Orthodox icon presents sanctified man, entirely transfigured from within, deified by the grace of God. The icon, then, shows man in the image of God. Western religious art emphasizes the humanity of Christ, particularly his human suffering, and invokes the emotions and senses of our human nature. The Italian holy picture shows God in the image of man. In the West, sacred art no longer speaks a sacred language. Its language has become that of the world. Western art does not restrict itself to traditional forms and styles, but grants greater artistic license to the painter. The inevitable result of this freedom may be like Ribera's painting of St. Agnes, which, although masterful in its style, is difficult to meditate upon due to its sensuous portrayal. Another example may be found in comparing the face of an angel from an Orthodox icon with one painted by Verrocchio. In the West, the halo becomes an external crown, a gift of grace rewarded. But the Byzantine halo portrays the radiance of the glorified face, as if it were the very center of the sun itself. The role of the iconographer, then, is to surrender his own imagination and will to the divine will, and to convey as completely as possible the truth of the divine incarnation, which is the same truth conveyed by the Holy Scriptures. The Church has ears to hear and eyes to see. We contemplate the truth of our faith orally in the spoken word through the Scriptures, and visually in the holy icons. St. Basil the Great said, "That which the word communicates by sound, the icon shows silently by representation." It is no coincidence that the Sunday on which we celebrate the triumph of Orthodoxy actually commemorates not a military or political victory, but the restoration of the holy icons into the Church. The Kontakion, or Feast Day hymn, expresses everything we've said so far. No one could describe the word of the Father, but when he took flesh from you, O Theotokos, he consented to be described, and restored the fallen image to its former state by uniting it to divine beauty. We confess and proclaim our salvation in word and images. My soul magnifies the Lord. This hymn is addressed to the Theotokos, the Mother of God, who is the icon of the Church. The confessing of the Incarnation is possible only if we also confess Mary to be the Mother of God. If Mary is the icon or image of the Church itself is the icon of the kingdom of God. The Church, as the Ark of Salvation, is built according to the plans of the tabernacle of Moses and the temple of Solomon. It faces east towards paradise, awaiting Christ, the Son of Righteousness, the Orient from on high, and awaiting the dawn of the day without end. The sanctuary represents heaven, the Holy of Holies, reserved for the high priest, the clergy. The nave, deified earth, represents the holy of the tabernacle, for the royal priesthood, the laity. And the narthex, or vestibule, is the courtyard, representing unredeemed creation. Between the altar and the nave, between heaven and earth, is an icon screen called the iconostas, through which the clergy, representing Christ, pass, uniting heaven and earth. During the liturgy, the faithful may contemplate these windows into heaven. The arrangement of icons on the iconostas is rather standard. On either side of the royal doors are icons of Christ and the Theotokos. On the deacons' doors, either sainted deacons or perhaps archangels. On the ends, the patron saints of the Church and the country. Above the royal doors is an icon of the mystical supper. The row of icons above that is called the dioceses, Christ surrounded by saints. The row above that contains the festal icons, including the Annunciation, Nativity, Transfiguration, and Ascension. Above that, the Old Testament prophets. And finally, the top row contains the Old Testament patriarchs. The icons around the royal doors are images occupying space, but represent the movement of the present through time. The icon of the Theotokos represents Christ's first coming, a past event. The icon of Christ on the right represents his coming in glory in the future. While on the altar table in the middle, Christ is with us presently in the Eucharist. In the sanctuary are pictured the Church Fathers, authors of the liturgies, hierarchs, deacons, concelebrants, the communion of the apostles, the Theotokos interceding for us before Christ, and finally Christ, the bloodless sacrifice of the Eucharist. Inside the dome, which represents the vault of heaven, is the Pantocrator, the ruler of the universe, the head of the Church. Announced by the prophets, established by the apostles below the dome, and supported by the 4 evangelists who spread the good news to the 4 corners of the earth. The pillars of the Church are the martyrs, hierarchs, and ascetics. The walls depict important events in the New Testament: the Sermon on the Mount, the woman at the well, the entry into Jerusalem, and so on. At the back of the church is depicted the Last Judgment, the beginning of the age to come. The church itself, then, is an icon of the body of Christ. It is a part of the kingdom of heaven as it already exists on earth, and it anticipates its coming in glory. Man himself was created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore this is an icon, a living icon. We are all living icons of God, created in his image, a spirit of freedom of will, to choose, to ignore, to love, to shun. We must strive to acquire his likeness, his perfection, which is realized by effort and sacrifice, fulfilled by grace, but not without the cooperation and free will of men. When we strive with all of our power towards the beauty of the likeness, divine grace enables us to attain it. God desires that we become through grace what he is by nature. This is a dynamic task to be accomplished, not one of passive faith alone. One will for creation, 2 wills for deification. Finally, we are reminded to search out and to find the image of God in our fellow man. Why do we use icons? The Church does not use icons. They are central to its life, a part of its faith. The icon serves as an intermediary. We venerate an icon, and our prayers rise to the prototype depicted. The icon participates in the holiness of its prototype, and through the icon, we do also through our prayers. The Church recognizes the monastic life as the ideal example of Christian living. The monk, who has given up the vanities and values of the world, represents man's reaching up toward God. The icon represents God's reaching down to man. So a monk venerating an icon constitutes the closest degree of union between God and man, save for the Incarnation itself. In Orthodox tradition, every family has a prayer corner, no matter how humble or sublime the residence, where the family gathers for prayer. The family becomes a miniature church, as St. Paul says, with the Father as head as Christ is of the church, but willing to sacrifice himself for it. The icon has a teaching role. It shows theology in color. St. Basil the Great says that icons are the books of the illiterate. We comprehend through our physical ears spiritual words. Contemplation with our physical eyes likewise leads to spiritual contemplation. What does an icon tell us? We know it reveals divine truths. Let's examine the teaching role of the icon. An icon of a saint, for instance, will often have scenes from his life depicted around the border. At no time, however, is a saint depicted in profile. Profile is the beginning of absence. Festal icons convey the same theological and dogmatic truths as the hymns for the feasts. Compare this icon of the Nativity with the feast day Cantacian. Today the Virgin gives birth to the Transcendent One, and the earth offers a cave to the Unapproachable One. Angels with shepherds glorify him. The wise men journey with the star, since for our sake the eternal God was born as a little child. And from the Stichira, from Vespers, what shall we offer thee, O Christ, who for our sakes has appeared on earth as man? Every creature made by thee offers thee thanks. The angels offer thee a hymn, the heavens a star, the Magi gifts, the shepherds their wonder, the earth its cave, the wilderness the manger, and we offer thee a Virgin Mother. O pre-eternal God, have mercy on us. Here are the icon and the troparion for theophany. When thou, O Lord, was baptized in the river Jordan, the worship of the Trinity was made manifest. For the voice of the Father did bear witness unto thee, calling thee his beloved Son, and the Spirit in the form of a dove confirmed the truthfulness of his word. O Christ our God, who has revealed thyself and has enlightened the world, glory to thee. The Cantacian of the Transfiguration describes its icon. On the mountain wast thou transfigured, O Christ God, and thy disciples beheld thy glory as far as they could see it, so that when they would behold thee crucified, they would understand that thy suffering was voluntary, and would proclaim to the world that thou art truly the radiance of the Father. There is a common misconception that Christ rose from the vault of the Second National Bank, with soldiers covering their eyes and angels heralding trumpets amid banners topped with 3-bar crosses. Actually, there is no scriptural basis for any of this. The angel rolled away the stone, not to let Christ out, but to show that he was not there, that he had already risen. If Christ could enter and leave a virgin's womb, and enter and leave a locked room, he could certainly leave a closed tomb. The true icon of the resurrection is actually entitled The Descent into Hades. The troparion simply states, Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. The cantac continues, Thou didst descend into the tomb, O immortal one. Thou didst destroy the power of death. In victory didst thou arise, O Christ God, proclaiming rejoice to the myrrh-bearing women, granting peace to thy apostles, and bestowing resurrection on the fallen. It's interesting to note that in this icon, the first to be rescued from the depths of hell are Adam and Eve, the first who had sinned. How is an icon made? Generally, you begin with a non-resinous wood. Birch is a favorite. And traditionally, a groove was cut across the back and a strut inserted to prevent warping. Then the wood is sanded, and perhaps a recessed area is routed out of the middle, leaving a natural frame. Loose linen was then glued to the board. A substance called gesso is then applied. Gesso is a mixture of alabaster or chalk and rabbit skin glue. Several thin layers are necessary to cover the grain in the wood. The board is then wet sanded to achieve a perfectly smooth, glassy surface to serve as a base for the paint. The sketch is done on a separate sheet of paper and later transferred to the prepared panel. With a sharp etching tool or scriber, the sketch is inscribed into the gesso, so that the lines will still be visible after the base colors are applied. The first colors to go on are all dark base colors. An iconographer begins with dark background colors and works his way to the lighter ones, much like a spiritual pilgrim who begins his journey in the darkness and comes to the light. Flesh tones begin as a dark olive color. Even white begins as a shade of tan. The pigments used in iconography originally were powders mixed with egg yolk. This is called egg tempera, which allows for layering or successive translucent coats of brighter colors, one on top of the other, forming a barely perceptible relief or sculpture, wherein the highlight areas, the tip of the nose, the forehead, under the eyes, would actually be higher than the rest of the area around it. It's interesting to note that even when oil painting was introduced into Western Europe, the Orthodox rejected its use as not being compatible to the aims of iconography. Oils produced a sensuous characteristic and did not lend itself to the layering method. Here the facial lines and hair have been drawn in. Next, the iconographer recreates the lines that were etched in by the scriber using black, brown, or a dark shade of the base color. By adding successive layers of lighter tan shades and highlights in almost pure white, the flesh tones have been developed. Notice shadowing and blending under the neck and around the cheek and forehead. This shadowing is called modeling and attempts to add a slight element of depth to the icon. Here the robes have been developed using the same technique of highlights and modeling. The red areas in the background have been developed, but not too brightly, in order to create a translucent quality of the throne and the cherubim. Now the blue background areas have been completed, and the area around the halo has been primed, ready for gilding. Gilding is accomplished by applying an adhesive called sizing to the area to be gilded. This is then covered with thin sheets of 23-karat gold leaf. After the excess gold has been removed, the icon is ready to be labeled. After gilding and lettering, the icon is varnished and let to dry. Originally, oliva, boiled linseed oil, was used to protect the icon and enrich the colors. But its tacky surface would collect dust and carbon and burn soot from the vigil lamps, and the surface would become darkened. Today, it's much more efficient to use a polyurethane varnish, which also prevents the colors from fading. And finally, the icon is finished, ready to begin its role as a mediator between heaven and earth.